Have you ever been about to go on a vacation or a photographic journey, and that journey or vacation was all of a sudden thwarted by bad weather like clouds, storm clouds, things like that? Oh my God, what's going on in my office? Why are all these storm clouds around here? You know, when I really think about it, some of the most magnificent photographs I've ever taken have been taken in bad weather, whether it's rain, snow, lightning, fog, it's all the same. These conditions just produce so much emotion, character, and mood, and it completely transforms your photograph. Let's talk about fog. So, I had this experience one time where I was traveling up to the top of Mount Evans in Colorado towards Summit Lake to photograph the lake with the sunset. And I had gotten completely fogged over by clouds. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh no, this idea I had of the sunset reflection of the lake is completely ruined. But actually, this condition created some of the most incredible fog photographs I have ever taken. So, how can fog actually benefit our photographs? Well, first, it creates very ethereal photographs. And what that means is you get that reduced clarity and that lack of detail and that haze. And I think that just creates so much intrigue for the viewer. And the lack of visibility, when you look into the unknown, into the background of the image, the unknown also creates a lot of intrigue. And lastly, the faded colors. I like that subtly faded color look in the image where it's not just blasted saturation, but very subtle. Also, a lot more intrigue. Overall, I think just the fog just adds so much mood into the photograph. So, what are some photographic techniques we can use to get the best out of our foggy photographs? Well, first, showing depth. Show something in the foreground that has detail, and as you go into the background, you can't see anything because you're going through the fog. And that creates a lot of intrigue into the unknown. Secondly, show certain parts of your image that have detail and then certain parts that don't. That contrast and detail creates a lot of interest. And lastly, and this is a general recommendation, but caveat, it's not always true. Don't fill your frame with too much white space because that is not making the best use of real estate in your image. All right, so let's talk about snow. If it weren't for snow, winter photography would be a lot less interesting. After all the leaves fall from the trees, things are kind of dull, but when it snows, it's awesome because now you have this new photographic world that opens up to you. Just like fog, snow produces those, particularly falling snow produces that lack of clarity, in the faded colors. But with snow, you get these very high contrast images where the brightness of the snow deeply contrasts pretty much anything else in the photograph, whether it's trees, architecture, whatever it is. You get these wonderfully high contrast images. Very interesting. And I think the most special thing about snow is that crystalline, pristine frost you get in the morning after a snowfall. And then that pristineness just reflects the glow of sunrise, and you get the most beautiful and magnificent photographs in that period of time. I love snow. All right, so what are some photographic techniques we can use to enhance our winter snow photography photographs? Well, the first one is do not burn the highlights. Snow isn't the most detailed thing, but it does have a lot of texture. And if you burn them out, you won't see it. Secondly, photograph during the snow, when the snow is falling to get that diffused nature, or right after it snows. Like I mentioned before, right after it snows, you often get that that crystalline frost on the trees, and it doesn't hang out around forever. So if you photograph right after a snowstorm, you can really get the best. You really get the best time to photograph that. I often find that reducing the clarity in Adobe Lightroom or whatever software you want to use generally leads to very pleasing results with snow photography. Also, use the contrast of snow against other objects. So, like whether you're doing architecture or trees, you're always going to have a very high contrast image, and make use of that in your photographic presentation. And lastly, again, this is a caveat, but don't fill the frame with too much white space because you want to make best use of your photographic real estate. So there's nothing like the weather conditions of rain that's more challenging on your photographic equipment. Rain may be a very challenging weather condition to photograph in, but geez, it sure produces some brilliant and shimmering images. Like all the other weather conditions, rain leads to that ethereal, low contrast nature, which I love. But what I really like about rain is it adds this wet, brilliant shimmer to color in your photograph, whether it's foliage, light reflecting off wet surfaces, like especially at night from like street lights, any of it. It's beautiful, that shimmer. What I really like about rain too is it. If you have a glow, any type of glow, whether it's a light, whatever it is, rain diffuses that glow, and I think that's just beautiful. Um, and the conditions it creates are also beautiful, like crepuscular rays. When you have rays from the sun piercing through the clouds and reflecting off the moisture in the air, amazing condition to photograph. And the obvious one is rainbows. I still remember a time when I was leaving Glacier National Park and this rainbow just appeared over this mountain range. And of course, it just finished raining. And that was one of the most memorable photographic experiences I have ever had. So, what kind of photographic techniques can we use to enhance our rain photography? Well, the first one is to use a polarizer. Often, when it's raining, you get this glare on anything in your image. And what the polarizer does is it cuts off that glare and allows the colors to saturate through in your image. So especially true of things like foliage and whatnot, if you're like you're a landscape photographer like me. Second is use a tripod. With rain, especially if you have like a polarizer, you're going to be dealing with lower light conditions, and having a tripod ensures that you can get a sharp image. You don't have to rely on like really high ISOs and things like that to stabilize your image. And lastly, protect your lenses and camera from the rain. And I have found the best way to do this is to use something like a shower cap or a plastic bag, and it's cheap. You know, if the plastic bag, you can like cut a hole in it and put your camera lens through it, you know, and then you can just cover it. And until you're taking your photograph, take your photograph, cover it again. Works really nicely, easy to get. All right, let's talk about lightning. I can't think of another photographic condition that leads to more impulsive and intensely dramatic photographs than lightning. The random and unpredictable and chaotic nature of lightning leads to such interesting photographs because essentially nature composes a photograph for you. All you can do is set up your camera with your best judgment and hope for the best. And that natural conflict of nature that lightning is leads to so much mood in your images, and you can just feel it in the images, and I love it. And you know, you just get often with lightning photographs so much brilliant color and high contrast, and the intrigue factor from a composition and color and form standpoint is very, very high. All right, so from my experience in photographing lightning storms, I think some of the best things we can do to maximize our results is using long exposures, like 15 to 30 seconds probably. You know, lightning is so random and sporadic that, you know, if you take a short exposure, it's hard to know if you're really going to get lucky enough to get a lightning strike in your frame. But if you take a long exposure, you maximize the chances of getting a single lightning strike and often many lightning strikes. Secondly, I think it's important to use the sharpest aperture of your lens, which for most people is probably going to be between like f11 and f8. And then use the camera sensitivity ISO to adjust your exposure so it's not overexposed or underexposed. You know, modern cameras these days make it really easy to figure out what the right exposure is. Obviously, this is a no-brainer, but use a tripod. I think that it's pretty impossible to take photographs of lightning without a tripod. You know, you need to be able to sustain sharp images with the long exposure. Get a well-made tripod and use it. And lastly, I like to photograph in RAW, especially with lightning storms, because that means that later on in software like Adobe Lightroom, I can go ahead and adjust the white balance later after the fact and adjust it artistically to my taste so I can get really great results. You know, some of these conditions are certainly not the easiest to photograph in, but rather than thinking about it like this, I rather think about it like this. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to check out some of my photography, see the link in the description below, and I hope to see you in another video.